Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today I want to find out if we are bonding with one another, if we're communicating effectively. We may not be. And also where the human race is now and where perhaps we ought to be. So I'm going to talk to a very nice gentleman who I've just been chatting to, who has been looking at aspects of psychology. He is a family mediator, a dispute resolution expert, and his name is Nick Haynes, and he joins me now. Hello, Nick.
Hi.
It's very lovely to have you on the show. A deep thinker, you told me, and
In
a lot
certain
of people.
areas.
Yes, in certain areas. Well, hopefully we're all deep thinkers in certain areas, but hopefully they're all useful areas for us in our life. And now, one of the things I know you were talking to me about before we started was communicating with one another. You do this within your couples counselling that you do, and trying to sort out the problems that obviously happen because people just don't talk to each other effectively, or indeed emotionally. And I assume that's because they don't know how to anymore.
I'm going to start by I was talking with a friend about preparing for this, and one of the metaphors I use, Richard, for, in a sense, perhaps what as a species we haven't quite seen is the what she said. Oh, you're not using that phrase again, elephant in the room. And I said, well, actually, it's exactly the right phrase. So I'm just going to say I actually specialize in couple counseling. In the past, I worked in family mediation and dispute resolution, and I've studied the bit of linguistics that looks at conversational style between us human beings. But the key area that I work in primarily is in our relationships. And the elephant in the room is that we haven't yet fully seen as a species that what primarily primes our behavior, our reactions, our responses, our interreactions, and how we talk to each other is really to do with our need for bonding, for connection, for attachment, for closeness, and yes, of to feel loved. That is a prime thing that's going on all the time somewhere inside a part of our mind, and we're constantly appraising in the absolute moment that we're interacting with the outside world or another person. Some part of us is going, do I feel connected? Do I not feel connected? Is it beginning to go? And then that primes much of how we behave, react, respond, and talk.
And when you talk about bonding, of course, people often think of mother-child bonding, that very early stage, which sets us up for the rest of our lives. If you've had a traumatic experience with your parents for whatever reason, that might, or probably does, I don't know, I'm not the expert, affects you. But some people seem to get beyond that, and some people really falter.
Yes, and there are not surprisingly a number of characteristics that come into play as to how the cards fall and then what each person may choose or not choose to do with them. And it doesn't always necessarily, I recognize, feel like a choice. We feel often defined by the circumstances, and quite often, understandably, we might feel we were dealt a difficult set of cards. But yes, different people respond differently to the circumstances they find themselves in, and it can affect what we might call their sense of secure connection with the outside world. When we feel and have had an experience of being brought up in an environment in which our primary caretakers reflect us and we experience a sense of overall secure holding emotionally and relationally and practically, that seeds in us a good template for us to be able to go out and thrive in life and ride the difficult waves that come our way when they do. And for others, we unfortunately have more of an experience of insecure connection, not ideal circumstances. And however much our parents or we may feel that they loved us, there may be challenges ahead for us to interact and engage in life in a way that we're able to thrive.
We currently are living in quite an unusual period in which I think, if you go back to a few years ago, in which there was this very large overreach from the government or authority telling us how we should react to something. If you go back, say, a few hundred years to a time when families were more close knit and together and people hadn't moved away quite so much, presumably the bonding back then and the communication would have been simpler, easier, because you've got more of your family and relations around than the sort of mixing of people that we have in this somewhat modern world that we're in today.
Yes, in some senses, as you describe it, that scenario would promote the possibility or probability of a more natural facility and experience of a more secure bonding. But then there were plenty of things going on in terms of individual characters in that family and that their psychology as to whether they were actually demonstrating love and a secure experience for the child. So there were implicitly maybe it would seem there was more opportunity, but actually there were other challenges that were to do with the individual characteristics, and that always applies.
So if the the best type of bonding is something that is not so much environmentally based in terms of our families and the situation, and that being more loving for each other is the thing. How do we get there?
Well, it is actually extremely environmentally, based. I mean, let's for a moment refer to nature nurture.
Right.
Nature refers to your sort of DNA or what's individual specifically about your sort of psychological genes, etc., etc. And nurture refers to the formative experience you experience in terms of a social interaction with others. So that's primary. It's primary that if we get a good experience of secure, loving, and holding, that sets us up for a good start in life. Just like if you put a plant in a soil, if you put it in a good soil, it has a good start and is more likely to be robust. So it actually is extremely associated with the environmental aspect of actually what we experience. The key thing that, in a sense, is contributing to a lot of violence, conflict, difference, and let's talk about war, is at this basic level is individuals, groups, countries not feeling relationally connected and emotionally connected with each other. And then that can contribute and add to circumstances that arise in which there is war and conflict and violence. So as we become more familiar and aware of what it is that's prompting our behavior, reactions, and responses, and are given tools, to learn how to communicate at moments when it's helpful for us to do so, when we are feeling something inside that's emotional or relational, we're going to actually find that there's the tool for our species to have the potential for a thriving, benign, and happy future.
Well, I don't think anyone would disagree with wanting to have that thriving, benign future. It feels as if the authority at the moment is very much pushing against that for us, that we are, the one thing that we seem to be missing is being able to unite. And even those in, let's say, the audience that watch my stuff that may be, say, in the truth and freedom and sovereignty movement and all of that, it does seem there is a hell of a lot of infighting because so many egos or people are saying, but this is the way we should do it, or this is the way we should do it. And there doesn't seem to be enough give and take so that people join together. Is that, can we conquer that?
Yes, it's a part of being a practical human being. That
Right.
we're collective in certain attributes, and individually we can express and want different things in a particular moment. So the
Mm.
tools we need for those moments, if we're willing to pick them up, is to kind of go, okay, I don't think you're treating me very well, or I don't think I agree with you, but to find ways to invite the other person to say more about their experience from an emotional relational perspective. Invite, well, I'd like us both to be understood here. I see that we're not agreeing with each other, but would you be willing? So make it an open-ended question and put out a suggestion there for, well, I am interested in how you feel, and I'd like you to be interested in how I feel, and to use certain tools that we will get to learn as a species to promote understanding, acceptance, and cooperation. And when both of us, let's just take two people, genuinely feel authentic, the other person cares about us being understood. They want to stand in our shoes, and yes, they want us to stand in their shoes.
Mm.
Somebody feels that, it's amazing. Magic takes place. And what that magic does is allow the possibility of compromise and adjustment and agreement. Because suddenly it's somewhere deep inside, whether that person cognitively experiences it, some part of them says, I was feeling a bit alone and separate from this person. Now I suddenly feel that they're here with me. I'm no longer alone. I like that. They're saying things that maybe I'm not used to somebody else saying, but I'm willing to reciprocate. So suddenly you have a positive upward spiral instead of this negative downward spiral. The question is, how are we going to seed this
Mm.
to the species? And I've got a few ideas about that.
Well, maybe you could share some of those, because it does seem that it's the better man who will let the other one express themselves, rather than be just saying, well, this is how I want it done, and I'm not really interested in your views because I think my views are much better.
So if I may go back to what you just spoke about, we're living in, as the Chinese, I used to think it was a nice thing that they were offering when they said, may you live in interesting times. I subsequently heard that it's supposed to be a bit more of a curse, but definitely we live in interesting times. But I think we're at a pivot, we're at a hinge. It's about actually a fantastic opportunity for the human race to begin to reassess in a conscious way, where do we want to come from?
Come from, as opposed to where we want to be.
Where, yeah, but also what template are we coming from?
Right. Okay.
I think we're a species that comes from heart-based love. I think we
Yes.
thrive on love. I see all sorts of examples of this. As an individual human being, I know about this. But I think it's time that we decide whether we're going to walk our talk. Are we going to operate from a practical, action-based, heart-based love? Or are we going to operate from being successful in life economically? There's nothing wrong with money. I like money, and there's no reason you can't have both. They're not mutually exclusive.
Mm.
But I think we somewhat lost our way in reminding ourselves gently and in an inviting way, rather than demanding it or pushing it, that we actually rather like love. I'm talking about a love that's not religious or
Mm.
necessarily spiritual. It's common and garden love. And when we feel it or give it or receive it, it feels really nice. So I think that's an important thing. Now, we're dealing with a difficult time. There's a lot more perceptible darkness as well as light that we're sort of experiencing, but there's quite a difference, and we're often people are talking about experience of sometimes evil in the world at the moment. My view is that we don't focus on what some other folks are doing, that we don't particularly want to go in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
or we don't think it's a good direction, that we actually focus on actually creating and asking and requesting for what we do want. So, for instance, as a practical idea, if we want to, invite our species to prepare for life in a wider with wider skills and tools, then we need to adjust our education so that it is far more holistic. I mean, if you don't give people the tools they need to be a thriving human being, then what do you expect you're going to get as a
Yes.
result? So it's sort of all there, but I think it requires, and to some extent, those of us who've got something to give or say. And when I say that, I mean that could be any human being. Everybody's got something to contribute to the tribe and the organism. But I think there are certain knowledge holders, like for instance myself. I'm wishing to offer and contribute as best as I can to offering some information, which I hope people will find useful. I think these knowledge holders need to come out of their compartmentalized vocations that they live in, whether it's in psychology or in social work and so on and so forth. And I think we need to ask them to actually come up. And at times, for instance, if governments or institutions or people who are supposed to be stewards of our democracy and of love aren't necessarily demonstrating that, then I think those of us who are able to comment, not to finger wag, because that always creates
Mm.
sort of defense and feeling accused. And it's difficult sometimes not to. But to be able to say, actually, I'd like you to speak sometimes a bit more about love and care, and I'm not sure that you follow the basic values and principles of democracy. So there are a few things that I think we can begin to do to start commenting on, beginning to steer things in the way that I think a considerable amount of us would love life to be like. I think most of us kind of are resigned to life can't ever be like that. I
Mm.
think this is a moment in time where we can actually practically start creating the world that all of us would dream and want.
So there may be a lot of people who are sort of skeptical that you can get there. They may sort of intrinsically, deep within themselves, totally agree with you. That would be fantastic if we can get there. But on the other hand, they've been experienced by, or they've been subject to, the levels of authority that have, as we've seen recently, that have been putting out very anti-human policies. We see that in commerce. We see that with, say, utility bills, that you're in a contract with somebody and you may have been with them for many years, and you say, well, hang on a minute, where's loyalty gone? I've been with you for ages, and now I'd like to do this, and you're stopping me. And we're seeing these bodies being very authoritarian, so that people are now skeptical, I think, of those people who are coming forward with, let's say, a new way, because maybe they've been tarnished by the darker ones who have been more bullying.
So let's get
So, yeah. So the question would be, how do you then move people who agree with you and want the practical side? Well, how are you going to do it then, and why should we trust you?
So you have to get down, in the soil with them, get practical, get nitty gritty. And one of the things, if I had the opportunity with a particular individual, would be to try and come alongside and ask them various questions about their experience. And then I might try and stand in their shoes and empathize with what it's been like. And then if I felt it was helpful and it was useful for them, in addition to giving them a sense of you're not alone, I get it, I understand it, it's difficult feeling like that. I might also offer some specific practicalities around how we could move from where they are to where, for them to feel better about where they are, or
Mm.
more hope. So I'm somebody who's very practical as
Do
well.
you think people know where they want to be? That's half the problem, isn't
I
it?
think I think if you respect where they are and acknowledge and validate where they are and ask them if they'd like be willing to talk, then I think, and if they start feeling you're interested and you care and you get them, I would be getting them to talk if it was possible. It's not always easy when you say, what do you feel?
Mm.
Or I either ignore it or they tell you what they think, but that's okay.
Or what they want you to,
Listening.
or what they want you to think of
Yeah,
them.
Yeah. So it's going to take time in this, but it's about giving people an experience that's authentic, that you actually care about them, and you want to know more about what it is they've experienced, and can we work together. So that's
Mm.
one nitty gritty practical way that I would, if I had the opportunity to speak with somebody, that I would do it.
So you talk about emotionally responding to people or finding out how they feel. Feelings have been cast around quite blandly, I think, in media. You know, feelings have been either portrayed as the most important thing, or the reverse is never mind how you feel. We've got to be practical about something that you know. And people talk about, well, I feel this, and it's my truth, and it may not be the truth in situations. We were talking before we were recording about men particularly showing their emotions and whether that's deemed to be weak. If you see a man cry, are you looking at a man and going, "Oh, well, he's a bit of a weakling," and that does seem to be shown very much in the media. I'm a little bit out of cater with the media because I don't really take much notice of it these days. But that was very much being portrayed in advertisements on the telly and on YouTube, of course, that it is very weak to cry. But the other side of it is that perhaps it's strong because you're bucking the trend.
Well, absolutely, and how somebody sees it is their business. But I would also offer the experience as a human being. I get it. I understand that, and I've grown up in an era where, to some extent, I learned to contain, my feelings as a child, because I happen to have a fairly critical father at times. But at the same time, I can see that it sort of makes logical sense. It's a strength to be able to contain, your vulnerable feelings, and certainly those human beings who work in the forces, it's drummed into them, and they work in a culture where they have to when they're on duty. But I also would offer an alternative characterization that is equally courageous and brave to be able to show vulnerability, because that's the key thing that every single couple that I work with, both partners in a couple, whether they're male or female or whatever combination, they're all showing that it feels really risky and vulnerable, and it's very exposing. And for some people, it's shame, feeling, or they're worried the other person will see them as a child or weak. So I also, understand, but I would offer the characterization that it's extremely strong to be
Mm.
able to show vulnerability. And fortunately, we're beginning to see all human beings beginning to show more of what I call the vulnerable emotions, like sadness, fear, and indicating that they're sort of, feeling some form of shame. What we don't encourage our clients in emotionally focused therapy, couples therapy, which is the form that I do. We don't swim them in shame, because it's very toxic. You'll see all sorts of we see all sorts of examples of everybody, without naming that they're feeling anything like that. They defend, and they show that, that they feel very awkward if they feel that they're being made to feel inadequate. So shame and its variations are extremely toxic things. But I think feeling disconnected, alone, isolated, not loved, valued, respected, or whatever it is in a relationship, and the primary emotions of the other primary vulnerable emotions of sadness and variations of fear are extremely helpful to speak about. And you talked about society. This is something that we need our institutions, all of them, politicians, business, medicine, science, banking. We can't want a different world and then sort of metaphorically, as we go out to work, shut the door behind the house, which is where most of it takes place.
Yes.
And then go, well, that's okay now. We're going out to make money, and it's okay to not be always a very nice person. And we don't necessarily comment when there's a transgression of some of the basic values of democracy, values and principles. I don't see that we can do that anymore. I mean, I'm, the thought of another political event this year coming up, it's like, for me, it's like that film Groundhog Day. Oh no, we're not going and having to experience an election again and hearing the same old weary things. I want our politicians to be human beings that speak about love, that fess up, and but
Yeah.
we need to ask this.
Yes.
One
But
of
in the corporate world that this we find ourselves more and more, in which the government seems to be much more separate from ordinary everyday people. The whole bunch of MPs that are coming in all come from one type of schooling. They're not coming from ground up from somebody from a working class background, or even a middle class background who's been in a variety of ordinary jobs. They're coming in as elites and treating everybody very much as a separate from them. And we've seen things like that with Partygate and things like that. One rule for them, one rule for others, and that's obviously an exaggerated example. But the idea, I'm just wondering what the viewers will be thinking when you're suggesting, as nice as it sounds, to have our politicians actually having any sympathy for us. I mean, the other day, Rishi Sunak stood up, was being questioned about the efficacy of the recent medical intervention. And one particular individual was saying how he had been damaged by it. And Rishi Sunak was able to sort of gloss over that. And we've seen politicians gloss over all sorts of harms that people may not even been perpetrated on purpose, but that they're in. And we see it with the councils. It's as if these leaders just simply do not care. They have a job, they do their job like robots. And I think that people would love to see what you're suggesting, but it's how do we get to that point?
So we start gently but clearly pointing out when they are transgressing or palpably transgressing the values and principles, the core values and principles of love and democracy, and what in the Second World War our country and other countries fought for. There are a number of, when I look out, and from my analytical, psychological, philosophical view, of which that's my main characteristics, I see something very obvious. I see open goals that we, in a sense, are being presented with, and that we're sort of walking past and can't see that the goal is open. Would be helpful for us. We can't blame it all on them or the politicians. It's important, without criticizing ourselves or getting into a sort of finger whacking exercise with them, although we might wish to and have good reason at times, we feel. It's important for us to stand up and point out clearly, gently, but insistently, I'm sorry, but you're not operating from the so-called principles that you supposedly are a steward from, and actually say it to them, and don't let them deflect it, but follow up on it in a way in which you say, I want you, I need you to be able to start speaking and acting in this way. And it's not good enough that you don't, for instance, answer questions, or that we might assume in terms of the so-called vaccine, that they are experiencing huge groups of individuals who won't say anything about it or shut it down. They can't say anything about it because their whole worlds would turn upside down, because
Yeah.
psychologically they would experience an overwhelming sense of fear and shame at what's happened. They can't admit to it. But I'm afraid we have to gently and clearly start saying certain things which stand up and need to be said. But
I mean, it sounds like you're trying to. What you're saying is, you're reminding people that they are human beings, that they
yes,
have emotions, and
yes,
exactly. But when you're standing, as I did, and many people have, um, in which you've got somebody who is trying to extract money from you using menaces. You have three officers of the police who, in the case that I was with them, was saying, do you really agree with this? This gentleman is trying to extort and is threatening to take away my van for a £9 fine that I didn't even know I'd infringed, where there's no there's no victim, really. It's just an infringement. And these three police officers were just laughing at the situation, just saying, well, you just need to pay it. And no matter how much attempt at humanity and saying, well, are you proud of what you're doing, they were totally removed from it. Somebody sent me a link this morning about a policy in which people are being thrown out of their houses because they're using the excuse that the new house they've spent 250,000 or 300,000 into is not fit to live in.
Yeah.
And they want to remove those people, and then they're actually going to put migrants into it, which, so, well, if it's not fit to live in, then nobody should be in it. But if somebody chooses to live in something that's a bit derelict, that should be up to them. But these policies that are being enacted, and you're trying to communicate with the people who are enacting them, are basically become robots. And it doesn't seem to matter how much. Now, I can see in a couple, in real life human existence, I absolutely get that you can say, well, hold on a minute, you're not treating your wife with dignity, and you're not stepping into her, or she is treating. I get that. But when you're dealing in the authority of life, which is the thing that seems to be the most oppressive at the moment, the humanity has just vanished.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I were to sort of imagine what you were wanting emotionally and relationally, was to feel considered, understood, and cared about for a really difficult experience that you had no idea that Bath had this policy, etc., and that you'd really appreciate some human understanding about it. What you met was a functional, practical approach, and it's in a sense, getting to know how you can get more of the type of response you want. It may be to you may need to look at a particular situation and go, am I likely to get the ingredients of what I want here, or will I have to try and get that by say having an opportunity to speak to a group like to approach the police and say, I'd like to reflect this to you. In other words, I'm saying that the actual situation might be difficult to get what you wanted. However, let's say you knew how to express yourself vulnerable and say, look, I'd really appreciate it if I can just let you know how I'm feeling. I'd like to, if it's possible for you to empathize with what's going on for me. That would mean a lot for me in this moment, but I understand you have a job to do. That's just one way in which you might get more.
I'm just wondering what my audience, who may well have also been at the coalface of these people who are threatening to take away their vehicles or collect money or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
With the idea of saying, could you be nicer to me?
But if we don't risk, and this goes back to the vulnerability of bonding and emotion, expressing emotion, if we don't take the risk to ask for what it is we want, then it's very difficult for us strategically to expect to get what it is. And if we just look at a situation, of course, we can go to so-and-so and 10 people and say, look what they did to me. And in that sense, everybody gets your sense of outrage or may join with you in that. All I'm saying is strategically, functionally, there are times it may be difficult to immediately get what we want or need from it. But that what I am proposing, the basic point is, we might not know how to do it. We may try it and somehow it doesn't land very well. We may feel I don't want to risk doing that because these people are just going to laugh in my face and I'll feel even worse. That would all be very human and very understandable. All I'm saying is we begin as a species to need to know more about what we can do if we're willing to risk changing the conversation and seeing if we can get more of what we want with another person. We have to change our dance step and sing a different song. And the more we do that, I referred to the word magic several minutes ago, it's surprising. The other person's brain will go, That's a bit different. I haven't heard that one before. He doesn't seem to be attacking me. He's not criticizing me or whatever. Maybe I will say something that is a bit more in kind in terms of what this other person is asking me. So it is difficult, Richard, and obviously we at times need to vent, and we need to have somebody else say, "Yes, poor you, that was awful," and so on, or just
Well,
let's.
I mean, I'm not necessarily looking for sympathy. I suppose it feels when you're dealing with corporate institutions that the humanity has been taken out of it. That you, but even the people who are doing the job have lost the ability to empathize and know that what they're doing is difficult. The other thing that came into my mind just then was we've been manipulated as a society by these same authorities, especially during the COVID period,
Yeah.
in which a nudge unit was advising the government how to psychologically get us to do what they were doing by appearing to be friendly and kind, but actually it turns out that all the things they were suggesting were not at all healthy. Staying in your house, being away from loved ones, sitting in front of your computer, relying on highly processed foods, and all of those. And when you realize that's what the authority who are manipulating the country are doing, it's very difficult then to say, oh, but shouldn't we love you?
And let's see if we can come, because you've asked several things and said several things in the last few
Yes.
minutes. And I feel like I want to see if we can pull out the nub of it that I
Yeah.
think,
Please do. Please do.
well, that I also want to answer and get to. I'm suggesting that we need to start referencing and gently but clearly pointing out when we what we do want. So we actually, to organizations and politicians and various institutions and organizations who have shown themselves in the last 3 or 4 years not to be operating from previously what you would have trusted, or they don't do it very well, but at least I sort of feel they're coming from a benign position.
Mm.
When we start seeing that they're not coming from it, what I'm seeing is that nobody is really pointedly standing up and saying, look, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's really important. I'm sort of feeling that you're shutting somebody down there, and that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel you really want to do that, or I would want you to do that. I'd like much more a sense of it being valued, that somebody might have a different view than, say, a government, an organization, an institution, a social media platform, and that, of course, that we want them to, in doing so, to be able to show that they are following these principles that I know you adhere to and believe. Actually, it looks like in this situation you're not following that, and I'd like you to. And if you get enough people standing up and saying what's not happening, what
Mm.
isn't that, but what they want to happen, then suddenly that gets seeded into the present day narrative, and people who are maybe sort of not really, members of the public, that are sort of, it's just flying over their head, are suddenly going, well, actually, that's a good point. That person's just saying, look, I don't think you're really being considerate or caring or benign in your approach here, and for these reasons. And it's important, and to remind individuals or institutions of their commitment to the values, ethics, and principles of democracy and love. We don't use the word enough. How often do you hear that word being used by some of those institutions I've mentioned, including politicians?
Well,
Can't
you
see
don't,
it. No.
and if you did, you'd slightly feel a bit queasy, I would think, because
I'd
the
love
trust.
it. I'd
Well,
love it.
yeah, I'm sure you would. But if I mean, we see it, say during a general election, a politician will come and kiss a baby and give the illusion that he is really genuinely interested. But I know from the emails that I've had from my audience over the last 14 months when questioning the efficacy of the vaccine, and people have sent me copies of the letters they've sent to their MPs. Their MPs will not, apart from one MP, they will not engage in that particular conversation, so that people are suffering and they have closed their doors, and they'll just say, no, it's safe and effective. We have nothing more to say. We trust what the government basically are telling us. And here is where democracy's been turned on its head. We're paying these guys and girls to serve us, and they are dictating the terms, and they're saying what they will listen to and what they won't listen to. And so then if you've got these members of authority, as you say, saying, well, expressing love, and I'd love to be more engaged in your community, and I'd love to help you, and I love what you're doing here. I don't think people can trust them anymore. So the only way you would trust, I'll just be very brief, the only way you would trust them if it's a completely new set of governance on a whole new system where people were genuinely offering that love and understanding and the bonding with the community, and coming from that community, rather than being a separate entity as if they've just beamed down from space to say, we're going to rule you.
So there's the immediate, and then there's the more middle to long term future. So in the immediate term, I'm proposing that not only do those of us who wish to follow a path of a benign future for the human race, which is based on heart-based love, and maybe we can talk a bit about ideological love in a moment to do with the woke movement. We start focusing and creating practical institutions and organizations that reflect those values and principles. If and when we wish to interact with other human beings who are in positions maybe where we don't feel that they are acting in a fully benign way, or they maybe are experiencing aspects of human psychology that are causing them to get frightened and not do their due diligence to fess up and follow democracy, or just stop shutting people down and calling them playground names of like anti-vaxxer and conspiracy theorists, which are all very convenient get out of jail terms that people use, so they don't have to really talk about it. I would suggest psychologically and strategically that it's not about sort of not talking with them or letting them off the hook, but we maybe understand that if we act in a way understandably, and I often, I when I walk, I rant sometimes. I'm so angry, but I also understand psychologically and strategically that if I want another person to kind of have the possibility to stay in touch with me, I need to just hold back and go, okay, I'm feeling like that, but what am I feeling underneath? Maybe I'm feeling frightened or discouraged or sad. So the point I'm making is what we want to try and do is come alongside them and see if we could connect with them by maybe offering a sense, this must be really difficult, must be a tendency to not be easy to see things that maybe you're on, or actually go against some of your basic precepts, but it's very scary and you don't know what to do with it. Now, I don't think it's possible to carry on doing that, but I need to be able to talk with you about that you're not answering these things, and that you claim that you're following the science, and you're actually behaving in a very non-scientific, uncurious way and trying to shut things down, which is quite obviously not scientific. So it's about coming alongside, because you actually do want the majority of people who can be kind of connected with and go, yes, it's not felt very good, and yes, I do really want to live a life of connectivity and love and values. We want to find ways to communicate with them. I'm not saying that means you give them a get out of jail card or you don't hold them to account. But if you accuse them, that just sets up polarization. But I'm not suggesting that you just do nothing about it. I'm suggesting we do something proactive, but it's about communicating and pointing out when they're clearly transgressing certain transparent features of democracy and saying, please, I really need you to explain how you're doing that because that clearly goes against X, Y, or Z. And there's not enough of that happening in my.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So, what about then? You mentioned wokeism, and this is something of the last 10 years, I suppose. But it seems to have been brewing a hell of a lot longer. But we're more aware of it, and we're sort of freer to speak of it, in which we do see a polarization of ideas and concepts, and many of those to perhaps older viewers who have seen life, let's say, before all of this type of, what would you call it, psychology or theory or whatever, seems to be the world turning upside down in yet another way,
Very much so.
in which you start off with, well, I've always believed that there were just two genders and that was perfectly fine. Or that it's perfectly all right to say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 9:30 express train, when suddenly that's now become an issue that you can't express words or many other parts of this woke agenda. So I know you wanted to say a few words on that, so I'm going to leave that to you.
Yes, I think this phenomenon of what we call woke, diversion, equity, and inclusion, and certain behaviors and language that's been promoted by their sort of most enthusiastic, members, if you like, for the sake of a better word, has been very confusing, because it's adjusted what was a previously established norm of acceptance, and there were lots of implicit assumptions mixed up in the way we behaved before. When I look at wokeism as a relationship counselor, I see, again, there's an emotional and relational message that those who are the most enthusiastic in woke are trying to say, but they don't say it directly.
Right.
So the basically, when I listen to somebody who's very enthusiastic about promoting, say, gender ideology, I hear somebody who is probably indicating to me that they're feeling something like, I feel quite alone inside. I feel at times that many people who I would like to understand and care about what is really important to me and some others are considerate and caring. And I would like to have that experience with them. But they don't say it. In fact, they don't go anywhere near saying it. And that's just a feature of where I started, which we don't know how to do that. It's not familiar, it's not programmed in us. So what they do is they use a moralistic ideological, pick up a moralistic ideological tool as a surrogate to try and get cared about in the way.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's trying to get love and care and consideration and all these important, meaningful things through ideology on its own. It's the right aim, but it's absolutely the wrong tool. Ideology in my view, has a part to play in disseminating and inviting and asking other human beings to know about or understand. But if you do not give plenty of opportunity and encourage people to speak about how they feel emotionally and relationally about the style and the method of ideologically you're promoting, we're going up a cul-de-sac and it becomes dark. And it does so for two reasons, or two main reasons. One is that if people feel that they are going to be told that they're a bad or worthless person because they're an ist or they're involved in an ism, in other words, they're going to be shamed, they will comply with it for fear of, it's better to go along with it, even though I've got some things I'd like to say and I've got some questions and maybe I want to challenge it. they'll go along with it for fear of being shamed. The other second emotion that is a problem is when you promote or an ideology that's a worthy thing to create a worthy result, is that the receiving person, let's say they're going to a lecture or seminar or whatever, again, if they're not encouraged to be able to speak about any, different views or things that they want to ask about emotionally and relationally, to say, well, I don't feel very connected with that. They will fear if they don't go along with it, they'll get excluded, immediately from that group. So they'll get disconnected. And again, that sends our attachment brains into panic. Or they may have enthusiastic close friends or members of their family, again, which would be a pressure on them to comply and go along with it. If you comply and go along with something that as a human being you don't really voluntarily do, that's a problem. That leads to darkness. So the intention behind the goal of encouraging everybody, or whatever their style or particular characteristic of how they like to express themselves as a human being, that is a worthy goal. But we have to be very, very careful. And we have picked up and are using this tool too liberally, and it's counterproductive. And actually, it becomes malign and dark when there is a coercive, however worthy the result is. Let's also not go too deeply that anybody who understands human psychology could potentially understand that they could steer people into doing what they want by promoting this moralistic, ideological approach without everybody having to talk about their emotions and their feelings, including the people who are promoting it, as well as those who are listening to it. So in a nutcase, that's my take on this. Will be a prison. It's already becoming a prison. It's the wrong vehicle, it's the wrong tool. And for those people who aren't using it in a specifically malign intent, it's important that we ask and request that we widen it to encourage everybody, both sides, to talk about their emotional, relational feelings that are underpinning it and what it's like when you talk about it.
So it is it something that is stoppable now? It seems like a juggernaut running through everything, through going back to corporations and stuff, that policies are being made to take note of this, but even more so to the damaging. I mean, we saw that in certain adverts for things like razor blades or beer, in which certain personalities were placed on the screen in terms of advertising, only to find that that was detrimental to the bottom line in terms of profit. But it seems to me the companies didn't mind that because they were normalizing this wokeism approach, and for a much bigger agenda.
So they only have the power that we give them.
Yes, but we're incredibly weak and we seem to just give it away left, right, and centre.
Okay, but I might offer an alternative characterization, which is that um, again, I'll come back to education. We're not taught to focus on our emotions. We're not
Right.
taught dispute resolution skills. I mean, it's extraordinary that for a species that relies on the spoken word, that we don't make as important as maths, English, and everything else, linguistic, the part of, pragmatics, which is to do with our conversations. I mean,
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with you, but we seem to be out of control of our education system. I mean, look at the sexualization of children in schools that's being pushed down. Parents don't even know it's happening. Only when little Johnny comes back and says, "Oh, today they were talking about masturbation, and don't be shy, give it a try." I mean, if it's gone that far, I can't see people wanting to talk about love. They'd be so outraged that their children are being sexualized at this age. And yet, where is the outrage? Where is the alternative? Only those people who are brave enough, strong enough, or financially able to take their kids out of school are doing that. Many people are still worried about, well, they've still got to go to work, and it's almost like, well, the school is doing right. The ignorance seems to be the biggest problem.
We all have the capacity, every single human being somewhere inside has the capacity to know what is benign, what is part of the human soul, what love is. They may or may not think about it, they may or may not know how to talk about it. So, well, there are a number of tools that we can pick up, are already beginning to do, Richard, that are working. But the key thing I'm saying is that it is with the public, all of us who care about the world we live in, to be able to, if we need, write down points that are good points and start speaking about them clearly and gently and insistently. A multiplicity of voices that can speak about the wrong psychology that's going on and be able to say it without getting into too much accusation or finger wagging, but point out what's going on and what's not, if you like, right,
Right.
what we want instead, and model it and demonstrate it. The other thing is, I call upon my colleagues who I said are compartmentalized, who have the awareness to say are often in organizations that have strong ethical backgrounds. So psychology has a lot of that, as I doubtless there is in many vocations. And those people who can see that it's being transgressed need to come out and stand up and say, this is not okay. And you're beginning to see the beginnings of it being met, encountered, and it will begin to crumble, because the points that will be made from these stakeholders, it will be clear for all the other people who wouldn't necessarily think to make them, but can be persuaded. So we need to focus on the open goal, which is they're showing us all the things that actually, when you can just cogently, articulately name how they transgress democracy or love, you can just gently say, look, that's not okay. And you need to
Yes.
get people standing up and saying it. That's about walking our talk. This is a moment when people have to stand up and say, we're here for love, and we're going to practically show and model how we want it. And let's focus on showing how we do it and what we create. We don't necessarily expect that those people currently who are in positions of so-called power and are stewards and custodians, we don't necessarily expect them to do it, because they may well be demonstrating that they're not going to. We have to start creating it ourselves.
Yes. Well, I mean, I do agree with pretty much all that you've been saying, that we are at this pivotal moment, and this is the time for us to do it. I feel in many ways, whether they've shown their colours, whether it's by accident or it's just something that we've had to go through, we are here where we are, and the realization now is that we are in a position where it's down to us to make the difference. And if, as you say, we now start able to express ourselves in a more humane way to one another, expressing our feelings and love, as you've so rightly said, and treat everybody with respect, then there is a chance that we can not go into the dark area. We're effectively shining light and saying, come on, everybody, we know we all want this. Let's all join forces, and incrementally, bit by bit, everyone doing their bit, we are, in fact, changing the situation.
Yeah, and it's going to, to have a certain wave of this. But the things that I'm talking about, for us all to begin to know how to risk sharing our emotions, takes a long time. It takes quite a long time
Yes.
to tune in, individual couple, partners, to focus on the vulnerable emotion rather than the thought. because when we get caught up in our thoughts, when we need to talk about our emotions underneath, then unfortunately we find we get stuck. So we need everybody to join in. We need those people who've got something to, specifically to contribute about psychology and about verbal communication to start coming out. For instance, I just do want to mention before we finish, nonviolent communication. This was the work of the late Marshall Rosenberg, who was a psychologist and an international mediator. He worked in many of the trouble spots, including in the Arab-Israeli area. And he created a fairly simple, and it doesn't mean it's easy to know how to use it, intentional form of compassionate communication. I never hear, this has been established and around for, I never hear anybody talking about it. But that's something concretely that we need to begin to embrace and speak about. Let's communicate with people, at least in the sense to give them a sense that we value what they're saying, then they'll value what we're saying. And we need methods to actually learn how to do this. And to begin with, we need the people that understand the methods to come out and model them.
Right. But where can we find out more information then? Because unfortunately our hour is up. But do you have a website in which people can find out more about this area of stuff that we've been discussing?
I have a small YouTube channel.
Fantastic.
Which is called NIck Haynes and the best kept secret, 4 separate words. And it's not that I'm the best kept secret. It's just that I had to find, and Nick Haynes was already taken. And so I had to find something. And you'll find out that I'm rather keen on bonding and attachment and connection. So the best secret is the elephant in the room, that connection primes our behavior. But certainly I've got 7 or 8 videos up there. And hopefully I'll put this up there, as well as the slide presentation I get to the World Council of Health in January. And I'm very open to communicating, talking with other interviewers and people in order that we can begin to sort of get more in touch with how to do these and how to talk and communicate, and what fosters good communication, with somebody you might be having a slightly different view with. Absolutely. So I'm part of being practical as well.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put the link in the description so people can go off and investigate your videos. It's been a very interesting debate, something a little out of the norm of some of the stuff that I've been talking about, but absolutely necessary, I think. And I hope people have enjoyed the conversation and not found me a little bit I don't normally get confrontational, but there was just a few things I wanted to sort of get, because I think the audience may, skeptical members.
Absolutely. I welcome all that. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm aware that I probably come across with a certain conviction and passion, but
well, that's good.
I really care about us, human race. And we've had a jolly difficult time, to use another metaphor that my friend I mentioned at the start didn't particularly like me using. We have had one hand tied behind our back.
Yes.
Didn't know about bonding until about 60 years ago. And that was for 30 years, thought it was just for children. It's actually for all of us. And that was until the mid-90s we realized that. So we're very, very young in terms of our understanding of this key core piece that primes our behavior, reaction, and conversation with each other.
Well, there we are. Go and check out Nick Haynes. That's Haynes.
The best.
The best kept secret on YouTube. Link in the description. Nick's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and enjoy what you're saying. I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests, of course. But until then, from Nick and I, thank you so much for tuning in. Till next time, goodbye.